Joining us now is former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. You have been concerned, and you have said that you fear that Hamas may exploit this deal. Do you think it wasn't worth it?
No, I can't say it's not worth it. It's not, and or. It's yes, I think the deal is worth it, but Hamas might exploit the deal. And keep in mind, that's why the Israeli families haven't been totally informed about who's on the list, because the list could change. Hamas is not just a terrorist organization that attacks us physically, it attacks us emotionally as well. And it's playing with the emotions of Israelis, particularly of these poor families. So to the last minute, until the hostages are actually released in the hands of their loved ones, no one's going to actually make a positive statement about the identity. So it's we got to be very, very careful. One thing they will exploit the ceasefire. Hamas will exploit the ceasefire to move terrorists from the north into the south, where they're embedded among the Palestinian refugees. They will use it to booby trap further all of Gaza. And move equipment around, and which will cost us ultimately in terms of our soldiers' lives. So it's a terrible decision that the Israeli government had to make. It's hostage life versus soldier life, and that's quite apart from the strategic difficulty of resuming the fighting once the ceasefire ends.
And there is concern about what that will look like when the fighting does resume, which Prime Minister Netanyahu has said it absolutely will. I want to play for you what former Israeli Deputy Defense Minister Danny Danon had to say specifically about that point. Take a listen.
We are paying a price because we had a very strong momentum of the military, but I can assure that we will continue with the military operation. We are not going to stop. It's only the beginning.
There's a concern about momentum and logistics. There's also a concern about broad support, especially globally, and what the impact could be. How much is that a factor for you as you watch this?
It's going to be a huge factor. The IDF needs time and space to act. And at a certain point, it'll also probably need some resupply of ammunition. But having said all that, and I can't stress this enough, a ceasefire ultimately means for Israel, it means kind of like a death. First of all, it means Hamas gets away with mass murder. It means Hamas will come back. Their leaders have said that they don't care how much they lose. They're going to come back and fight Israel again and again and again and again. Israel itself has 250,000 displaced people who can't go back to their homes. We won't have internal security, and we won't have regional security. In the region, countries like Iran will internalize that they can strike Israel with impunity, but when Israel tries to defend itself, it'll be slapped with a ceasefire. So we actually can't survive in that region of the Middle East without continuing the fight against Hamas. Extremely difficult, but Israel really has no choice.
What kind of concessions going forward do you think, Ambassador, would be most prudent for Israel to make? This deal is essentially 3 for 1, right? 3 Palestinian prisoners for 1 Israeli hostage. Is that what it should be going forward? Should Israel be willing to go further if Hamas demands to? Because, we heard Bibi yesterday promise to bring everyone home.
It's quite a promise. Here's the sort of the algorithm, if you will, of the whole thing. Nothing would have happened. This whole deal wouldn't have happened if Israel hadn't gone in on the ground in Gaza. It began to squeeze Hamas. And Hamas is under great duress right now. Keep in mind, Hamas has been underground for 6 weeks now. And they don't really come out and fight. Their terrorists will come out and fire an RPG or an anti-tank missile at our troops. Then they go back down into those 300 miles of tunnels underneath. So Hamas is in a difficult situation. The more Israel applies the pressure, I think Hamas will be more in a position to negotiate. And whether it's the form of 3, Palestinian terrorist prisoners for 1 hostage, will that continue? More or less. Keep in mind, when we released Gilad Shalit, this is now a decade ago. He was an Israeli soldier who was kept 5 years in as a hostage in Gaza. Israel released over 1,000 terrorists in return for 1 soldier. You see that I hate this sounds very cynical, but the price has gone down. The price goes down because Hamas is not in a position to dictate.
But, Ambassador, isn't it also a question of who is being released? Because among those 1,027 prisoners released for Gilad Shalit was Yahya Sinwar, who is now head of Hamas. So the question is who also, right?
No question about it. I think that just sort of sharpens my point, is that who's being released. Back then, these were actual terrorists with blood on their hands. Right now, among those being released by Israel are not people who actually committed murder. They may have been accessory to murder, but they're not actual murders themselves. That's very important because in Israeli society, you have to go to the families of those victims and say, listen, the person who killed your loved one's getting out of jail. That's very difficult. But here's the bottom line. The bottom line is at the end of the day, Hamas will not release all the prisoners because the prisoners are their get out of Gaza free card. And they know that if they release all the prisoners, all the hostages, Israel would flood the tunnels and basically kill Hamas. So there may be a deal out there similar to that which the PLO reached with Israel in 1982 in Beirut. I'm that old, I was there. And the idea is PLO evacuated Beirut on ships. They went to Tunis. Maybe there's a deal out there down the line where Hamas will say, okay, here are the rest of the hostages. Let us get out of here. And we'll go to Algeria or something. And I think, I'm not saying I'm not a representative of the state of Israel now, but I would think that the majority of Israelis would go for that deal.
Ambassador Michael Oren, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Big, big day ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Big day. Thank you.
And our